The silver chalice trembled in Arya Windmere's pale fingers as her sisters shoved her forward, their laughter cutting through the smoky air of the great hall like shattered glass. Her simple gray dress hung loose on her slender frame, a shadow against the moonlight cascade of her silver hair, as she stumbled toward the raised platform where the Alpha King waited in firelight and darkness. Her eldest sister, Elena, had painted her lips crimson and wore a gown of midnight blue, cut to show the strength in her shoulders, the predator in her bones. The middle sister, Maya, had woven gold through her dark waves and anointed herself with oils that made the torchlight dance across her skin like promises. They had plotted for months, these sisters who shared her blood but not her gentleness, scheming how to capture the attention of Kieran Blackthorn, the Alpha King whose mere presence made lesser wolves bare their throats in submission. But when the moment arrived to serve him, when the winter feast demanded someone present the king with the ceremonial chalice of mead, they had seized Arya by her delicate wrists and thrust the goblet into her shaking hands. "Go!" Elena had hissed, her nails carving crescents into Arya's pale skin. "You're the Omega. You serve. That's the only thing you're good for." Maya's laugh had been poison wrapped in silk. "Perhaps, if you're fortunate, he'll notice you before his gaze finds someone worthy." Arya walked, her heart a wild bird throwing itself against the cage of her ribs. Her eyes lowered as an Omega must be, her footsteps hushed as falling snow. The great hall stretched before her like a frozen eternity, packed with wolves from every territory in the realm. She could sense him before she saw him clearly. The Alpha King's presence was gravity itself, pulling at something deep inside her chest, something she had never felt before and possessed no name for. Arya climbed the 3 stone steps to the throne, her knees weak, her breath shallow. She kept her gaze locked on the chalice in her hands, watching how the mead caught the firelight like liquid amber. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the snap of the great hearth. "Your mead." Silence fell like the first snow of winter over the hall. And then, for the first time in her 21 years, Arya Windmere made the forbidden choice of looking up. Kieran was a man forged from thunder and battle. He sat upon his throne of ancient oak and iron, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, even in stillness. His hair, black as a raven's wing, fell in waves to his shoulders. His beard was trimmed close, but couldn't soften the strong angles of his jaw, the fierce beauty of his face. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, had been studying the crowd with profound weariness until they found her. The moment their eyes met, something shattered in the air between them. Arya felt it like a physical blow. A golden thread pulled taut. A song she had never heard, but had been humming her entire life, suddenly given voice. Her breath caught. The chalice nearly slipped from her trembling fingers. The Alpha King's expression transformed. The weariness vanished, replaced by something raw and startled, something that looked almost like recognition. He leaned forward slowly, his battle-scarred hands gripping the arms of his throne, his dark eyes widening with intensity that made Arya's knees buckle. Kieran reached out, and when his calloused fingers brushed against hers as he took the goblet, a spark of energy passed between them, bright and sharp as static shock, warm as summer sun on bare skin. Arya gasped softly. The king's eyes flashed gold for just an instant, the wolf rising to the surface, recognizing, claiming, knowing. "Your name," he said, his voice deep and rough as distant thunder. The mead sat forgotten in his hand. "Tell me your name." Arya swallowed hard. "Arya, your Majesty. Arya Windmere." "Arya," he repeated as though tasting each syllable, as though her name were a prayer he had forgotten how to speak. From behind her, Elena's voice rang out, honey-sweet and poisonous. "Your Majesty, our youngest sister, is clumsy and simple-minded. She begged to be allowed to serve you, though we told her she wasn't worthy. Please forgive her presumption." Maya stepped forward, her dark hair gleaming. "We, your loyal subjects, would be honored to attend to your needs personally. Our sister is merely an Omega, after all." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kieran's eyes never left Arya's face, but the warmth that had been building there turned to ice when he finally, slowly, turned his attention to her sisters. "I did not ask for your names," he said quietly. "I did not ask for your presence. I asked for hers." Elena's face flushed crimson. Maya's smile froze and cracked like ice over deep water. The court erupted in whispers. Kieran turned back to Arya, and his expression softened, the brutal edges giving way to something that looked almost like wonder. "Step closer," he said, and it was not a command, but a request, gentle as he knew how to make his voice. "Please." Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible as she had learned to do. But something stronger, something that lived in her bones and sang in her blood, told her to stay. She took one step forward, then another, until she stood close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough to smell pine and smoke and something wild clinging to his skin. "You feel it too, don't you?" he said softly, meant only for her ears. It was not a question. Arya nodded, unable to speak, unable to deny the truth that thrummed between them like a living thing. She had heard stories all her life about the bond, the sacred connection that tied true mates together, soul to soul, wolf to wolf. She had never expected to find it. Omegas rarely did, but here she stood, trembling before the Alpha King of all the realm, feeling a connection so powerful it threatened to unmake her. "I need you to stay," Kieran said, his hand lifting slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished. When she didn't, his fingers touched her cheek, rough calluses against soft skin, warm and gentle despite the strength coiled in every line of his body. "Will you stay?" Behind her, Elena hissed something vicious. Maya's voice rose in protest, but Arya heard none of it. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." Something fierce and triumphant flashed across Kieran's face. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, gentle but possessive, and he stood from his throne, rising to his full height. "Then you are under my protection," he declared, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Let it be known that Arya Windmere is mine to guard, mine to care for, mine to defend. Anyone who harms her, insults her, or forces her to act against her will answers to me." His eyes, glowing gold now with the power of his wolf, swept over Elena and Maya with lethal promise. "Is that understood?" The sisters paled. The court bowed. And Arya, who had spent 21 years being invisible, being small, being forgotten, felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, but blooming like spring after endless winter. Kieran kept his hand at the small of Arya's back and guided her to a seat beside his throne, a place that had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. He poured her mead with his own hands, served her roasted venison from his own plate, and spoke to her in low tones that made the rest of the hall fade into irrelevance. "You're shaking," Kieran observed, his brow furrowing with concern. "Are you cold?" "Afraid," Arya admitted, her hands wrapped around the goblet. "And neither. I don't understand what's happening." "You've never learned about the mate bond." It was a statement, not a question, and there was anger beneath it. Not directed at her, but at a world that had failed to teach her about her own birthright. "I've heard stories," Arya said softly, "but I'm an Omega. We don't usually find true mates. We're meant to serve the pack, not to be chosen by one." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "Everyone," Arya said simply. "It's just how things are." The Alpha King leaned close, his dark eyes intense. "Then everyone is wrong. The bond doesn't care about designation. It doesn't care about status or rank. It cares about souls that fit together. His hand covered hers. And yours, Arya Windmere, fits with mine like two halves of the same whole. Arya felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't say if they were from joy or fear, or the overwhelming weight of being truly seen for the first time in her life. When the feast burned low and the night grew cold, Kieran stood and offered Arya his hand. "Walk with me. I want to show you. Want something." He led her from the great hall, down corridors lit by torches, up a spiral staircase higher and higher until he pushed open a heavy wooden door. They emerged onto a balcony that jutted out from the castle's highest tower. The world spread out below them in patterns of moonlight and shadow. Pine forests stretched like dark seas toward mountains that rose against the starlit sky. "This is my favorite place," Kieran said quietly. Away from the court, away from the weight of watching eyes. His warrior's mask began to slip. "When the burden gets too heavy, I come here." Arya looked up at him, seeing how the moonlight caught in his dark hair, how it softened the harsh lines of his face. "How long have you carried this burden alone?" 12 years, Kieran said, his voice rough with old pain. "My father died in battle. I was 22, barely ready. But the kingdom needed an alpha king, so I became one." He paused. "I've been alone, Arya. Surrounded by thousands, but utterly alone. Until tonight." Arya's heart ached for him. "I know what it means to be alone. I've spent 21 years being invisible. My sisters always told me I was worthless, that I'd never be more than a servant." Her voice grew softer. "I believed them." Kieran turned to face her fully. "You were never nothing," he said fiercely. "The world was just too blind to see you. But I see you, Arya. From that first moment in the hall, I saw everything you are." He reached up slowly. When she didn't move away, his hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "You're beautiful, and brave, and kind, and mine." Then he kissed her, his lips claiming hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The bond between them flared to life fully, no longer tentative but blazing, a golden thread visible in the darkness, binding them together in ways that transcended flesh and bone. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I will never let you feel small again," he promised. "Never invisible, never alone." Arya woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows and the scent of wildflowers filling the air. She blinked, taking in the royal chambers that Kieran had given her, rooms adjacent to his own, with walls painted in soft creams and golds. But outside their sanctuary, poison was already spreading. Elena moved through the court with calculated precision, her voice honey as she whispered to anyone who would listen. "Dark magic. How else could a simple Omega ensnare an Alpha King? Our poor sister always was drawn to forbidden things." Maya took a different approach, cornering influential alphas. "The bond is false," she insisted. "The king is bewitched by her unusual appearance. That unnatural silver hair. No Omega Queen. It goes against everything we are." The sisters gathered allies quickly. Highborn wolves who saw Arya's sudden elevation as a threat to the natural order. Arya felt the hostility the moment she stepped into the corridors. Eyes followed her everywhere, cold and assessing. Whispers died when she approached, only to resume louder once she'd passed. She tried to attend a council meeting and was told her presence wasn't required. She attempted to join the ladies at their needlework and was met with icy silence. Lost and overwhelmed, Arya found herself wandering toward the only place that felt safe, down to the warm glow of the castle kitchens. The head cook, an older woman named Marta, with flour-dusted hands and laugh lines around her eyes, looked up in surprise. "My lady, are you lost?" "No," Arya said softly. "Just, may I sit here for a while?" Something in her voice must have reached Marta because the woman simply nodded and went back to kneading bread. Arya sat on a wooden stool near the hearth, watching the kitchen staff work. Slowly, carefully, she began asking questions about their lives. She listened when a young scullery maid spoke about her sick mother. She helped chop vegetables when preparations fell behind. She laughed at the cook's stories and remembered everyone's names. By evening, word had spread through the servants' quarters. The new Omega Queen had a kind heart. She saw people, really saw them, in ways the Highborn never had. Over the following weeks, Kieran watched something remarkable unfold. The shy Omega, who had trembled before his throne, was finding her voice. It started small. Arya began spending her mornings in the servants' quarters, talking with Omega families about their children. She learned that most Omega pups never learned to read, were never taught they had value beyond service. So she established a school in the castle's east wing, filling it with books and slates, hiring teachers who believed that every wolf deserved education, regardless of rank. The Highborn scoffed. Elena spread rumors that Arya was trying to upset the natural order, but when Kieran walked past the school one afternoon and heard children's laughter echoing through stone halls that had been silent for years, he felt something shift in his chest. Arya didn't stop there. She created councils where wolves of all designations could bring concerns directly to the throne. Omegas spoke of unfair working conditions. Betas raised concerns about trade routes. The kingdom began to divide. Traditionalists muttered about chaos and disorder, but others, particularly those who had lived in the margins, began to hope. The breaking point came on a cold morning in the third week. An elderly Omega woman named Sigrid had dared to speak up at the market, suggesting fair distribution of winter stores. A highborn alpha named Torsten had publicly humiliated her, forcing her to kneel in the street and stripping her of her food rations, claiming it was his right to discipline an insubordinate Omega. Word reached Arya while she was in the library. She found Kieran in the throne room, surrounded by his council, and walked straight to the center of the hall. Her hands were shaking, but her voice cut through the assembled wolves like a blade. An Omega woman was humiliated today for speaking, she said, looking directly at Kieran. Punished for suggesting we care for our people through the winter. I want justice. The council erupted. It's tradition, one alpha argued. Omegas must know their place. Then tradition is wrong, Arya said, her voice stronger now. She turned to face the council. If this kingdom's strength is built on cruelty to those who can't fight back, then we're not strong at all. We're cowards. Silence fell like a hammer. Kieran rose from his throne, his presence filling the hall. He looked at Arya, his mate, his queen, standing brave and trembling before wolves who could tear her apart. Pride blazed through him, fierce and hot. Torsten will be stripped of his rank and exiled, Kieran declared, and I'm establishing new laws. No wolf may harm another for speaking truth. Omegas are under the crown's protection, same as any other. Anyone who disagrees can challenge me directly. No one spoke. No one dared. That night, alone in their chambers, Kieran pulled Arya close. You're teaching me, he said quietly. That true strength includes mercy. That power without compassion is just tyranny. He pressed his forehead to hers. You're not just remaking the kingdom, Arya. You're remaking me. Darius Ironpaw arrived with the first winter storm, ice in his wake and darkness in his eyes. He was a mountain of a man, his presence commanding from decades of leadership, his gray-streaked hair pulled back in warriors' braids. The northern pack followed him into the great hall like an army, their presence filling the space with threat and challenge. Kieran sat on his throne with Arya beside him, and he felt her tense the moment Darius entered. Alpha King, Darius's voice boomed across the assembled court. I've traveled far to speak truth to power. Then speak, Kieran said, his tone flat and dangerous. Darius stepped forward. You've taken an Omega as your mate, an Omega as your queen. This isn't just unconventional. It's an insult to natural law, to everything our ancestors built. He said the words like curses. An alpha king must mate with strength, not weakness. The court erupted in whispers. An Omega Queen makes you vulnerable, Darius continued, his voice growing louder. It shows weakness where we need strength. He turned back to Kieran, his gray eyes cold. I challenge your fitness to rule. I invoke the ancient right of trial by combat. Face me in single combat, Alpha King, with your bond as the wager. If you lose, you publicly reject this arrangement and choose a mate worthy of your station. The hall fell deadly silent. Kieran stood slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His power radiated from him in waves. You come into my hall, insult my mate, and challenge me. He descended from the platform, with predatory grace. I accept your challenge, Darius Ironpaw. 3 days from now, in the ancient arena. Trial by combat. His eyes flashed gold. But know this. When I defeat you, and I will defeat you, you'll spend the rest of your life remembering that an Alpha King's strength is not diminished by love. It's magnified by it. Darius bared his teeth. 3 days, then. May the strongest wolf win. The 3 days before the combat stretched like years. Kieran trained with fierce intensity, his body becoming a weapon honed by determination and focus. What if Darius was right? What if loving Arya had made him weak? What if he failed her? Each night, exhausted from training, he went to Arya's chambers. She never asked about his doubts, never pushed him to speak. She simply held him, pouring strength through their bond, faith and love, and absolute certainty that he would prevail. On the night before the combat, Kieran sat before her fire, his head in his hands. What if I'm not enough? He whispered. What if loving you costs me everything? Arya knelt before him, tilting his face up with gentle fingers. Listen to me. You're not fighting for the old ways or the new ways. You're fighting for us. For this. She placed his hand over her heart, where the bond thrummed golden and strong. And we are worth fighting for. We are worth everything. Something settled in Kieran then, a certainty that pushed through the doubt like dawn through darkness. The morning of the trial came cold and bright. Thousands gathered at the ancient stone arena. Arya sat in a place of honor, wrapped in furs, her silver hair unbound and streaming down her back like a banner of moonlight. Before the combat began, Darius stood at the arena's center. Behold your Omega Queen, he called out, gesturing toward Arya with theatrical contempt. Too weak to stand beside a king, too fragile to rule. Arya stood. Her legs trembled, but she descended the steps into the arena floor, walking until she stood before Darius and the assembled thousands. You measure strength by how hard you strike, she said, her voice ringing across the stone. I measure it by how many times you rise after being struck down, by how you choose kindness when cruelty would be easier, by how you love when the world tells you you're not worthy of it. She turned, addressing the crowd. And by that measure, I am the strongest person in this arena, because I've been beaten down my entire life, and I'm still standing, because I choose mercy over vengeance, because I love despite being told I don't deserve it. Silence fell, absolute and profound. Kieran watched his mate, brave and trembling and magnificent, and pride blazed through him like wildfire. The combat began at dawn's first light, and it was intense from the first moment. Darius and Kieran circled each other like winter wolves, their movements precise and powerful. The crowd pressed forward, the tension electric. Darius struck first, a powerful blow that Kieran barely blocked. Kieran countered, his strike connecting solidly. The sound echoed across the arena. They broke apart, circled again. Both were breathing hard, testing each other's defenses. The fight escalated. They moved with incredible speed and strength, each strike calculated and fierce. They crashed against the arena walls. the force of their movements shaking the ancient stone. Arya watched from her seat, her hands gripping the stone. She felt every impact through the bond, sharp jolts of connection, waves of exhaustion, the burning determination that kept Kieran moving. She refused to look away. Instead, she poured everything she had through their connection: faith, love, absolute certainty that he would prevail. The fight continued, minutes bleeding into what felt like hours. Both warriors were exhausted, pushed beyond normal limits. Then Darius overextended. A powerful strike meant to end the fight, thrown with everything. Darius had left. But the force made him lean too far, left his defenses open for just an instant. Kieran saw it, moved with impossible speed. He was inside Darius's guard before the Northern Alpha could recover, his hand at Darius's throat, forcing him backward and down. They hit the frozen ground with impact that shook the arena. Kieran's position was dominant, his strength undeniable, his victory clear. "Yield," Kieran commanded, his voice rough with exhaustion, but absolutely unwavering. Darius struggled, pride warring with the inevitable. Then slowly, reluctantly, Darius bared his throat in the ancient gesture of submission. "I yield." The arena exploded. Thousands of wolves roared their approval. Kieran stood, swaying slightly, exhausted, but victorious. His eyes swept the crowd until they found Arya. She was already running, heedless of protocol or dignity. Kieran caught her, his arms closing around her despite his exhaustion. "I knew," she whispered against his chest. "I never doubted." The formal bonding ceremony took place 7 nights later when the moon hung full and silver above the sacred grove where Kieran's ancestors had performed the same ritual for 1,000 years. Every pack in the kingdom came to witness. Thousands gathered around the sacred stones, their breath misting in the cold air. Arya and Kieran walked into the clearing together, hand in hand. She wore a gown of white silk that seemed to glow in the firelight. Kieran wore the formal leathers of his ancestors. The pack shaman waited by the fire, an ancient woman named Alara, whose white eyes saw far beyond the physical world. "Alpha King," she said, "you bring your chosen mate before the pack, before the moon, before the ancient powers. But this is not just a bonding. This is prophecy fulfilled." A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. Alara raised her arms, addressing the crowd. "Centuries ago, it was foretold that when an Omega and Alpha King truly bonded, when love transcended rank and tradition, it would signal a new era. The end of rule by fear, the beginning of rule by unity." Her white eyes seemed to focus on Arya. "She is not an anomaly. She is the chosen one, and this bond will transform everything." Stunned silence fell over the grove. Then slowly, wolves began to kneel, acknowledging not just their king, but the destiny unfolding before them. The shaman produced ancient ceremonial oils, anointing each of their hands with sacred herbs that had blessed bonds for generations. She pressed their hands together, palm to palm, life to life. The moment their palms touched, the bond between them erupted in brilliant gold light, visible to every witness, undeniable and sacred. The thread that connected their souls blazed like captured sunlight, weaving around them, binding them in ways that transcended flesh and bone. The crowd erupted in howls that shook the ancient trees. Alara placed a crown of silver and moonstone on Arya's head, marking her officially as queen. When Arya turned to face her people, she no longer looked down in Omega submission. She stood tall beside Kieran, her silver hair catching moonlight, her eyes clear and certain. She had been invisible. Now she was luminous. The prophecy was fulfilled. The kingdom was transformed, and love had conquered tradition. Spring came to the kingdom with wildflowers and new beginnings. Over the years, Arya and Kieran's children grew. Their daughter Elise was born fierce from her first breath, carrying her father's dark hair and her mother's storm-gray eyes. Then came Rowan, thoughtful and strategic. Next, Lyanna, who inherited Arya's gentleness, but possessed quiet determination. And finally, Cole, joyful and adventurous. Parenthood transformed them both. Kieran, who had ruled through strength and control, learned to be playful. Arya would find him wrestling with their children in the gardens, his deep laughter echoing off stone walls. Arya, once so timid, discovered a fiercer side when her children needed protection. She became the shield they needed, finding reserves of courage she never knew existed. The reforms Arya and Kieran had implemented took root deeply. Omegas now had legal protections, access to education, opportunities to rise based on merit rather than birth. Then one autumn day, Elena and Maya returned. They arrived separately, months apart, both worn down by years in loveless marriages arranged for status and power. They came seeking forgiveness, expecting rejection. Instead, Arya opened her arms. She gave them refuge, helped them find their freedom, supported them as they slowly remembered how to be whole. "How can you forgive us?" Elena asked one evening, her voice breaking. "After everything we did to you?" "Because holding on to bitterness would only poison me," Arya said simply. "And because you deserved better than what our mother taught us. We all did." On Arya and Kieran's 10th anniversary, they returned, to the balcony where they'd first kissed. The same stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal. Below, in the gardens, their children played. "Do you remember?" Kieran asked, his arm around Arya's waist. "When I told you that you'd unmade me?" "I remember. I was wrong. You didn't unmake me. You remade me into something better, something whole." His voice was rough with emotion. "You didn't just give me love, Arya. You gave me a reason to be more than a weapon." Arya turned in his arms. Silver threaded through her hair now, and lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes, but the bond between them burned as bright as ever. "And you taught me I was always worthy," she whispered. "I just needed to believe it. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I thought I was worthless. You loved me until I learned to love myself." As stars emerged overhead, their bond glowed soft gold in the gathering darkness. A light that had never dimmed, a connection that had only deepened, with time. They held each other close, two souls who had defied tradition, fought for their love, and transformed a kingdom through the simple but revolutionary act of choosing each other again and again every single day.